Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage, marketing professor, and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Really excited to introduce our guest today, Duane Brown, founder and head of strategy for Take Some Risk. Duane has been called a digital nomad by friends after living in 6 cities across 3 continents and visiting 40 countries around the world. He now lives in Toronto, Canada, helping e-com and SaaS brands grow through data, CRO, and marketing. He was also named one of the 25 most influential PPC experts by Hannapin Marketing in 2017, and he definitely has been a PPC expert since then. Besides for being a Google Ads guru, he is a Shopify partner and expert. Today, we're going to be talking about PPC, marketing, travel, and a whole lot else. How are you doing, Duane?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me, Danny.
It's so nice. We've chatted a lot throughout the years through Twitter, and we're part of Foxwell. So it's so nice to finally have you in person. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to meet people virtually whenever you can. I went to school for college, which is probably a little bit different than how college works maybe other places. So like in Canada, college is more like hands-on stuff. So you go for like theater, or in my case, I went for public relations or PR. So I did that for 3 years. And then I went to university and did sort of undergrad in a mix of business and marketing. And then about 2 years in, I realized that going for the full 4 years probably wouldn't really matter. No one would care because I would have been like, 30 or something like that when I graduated. So I skipped the whole degree part and just went for 2 like certificates at the university level with a focus on business and marketing. Because at least back then when I graduated, it made, I think, more sense to do both college and university, because some people just had college and some people just had university. And I'm like, well, more education isn't bad. I should do both and try to get an edge out there on the market. And I was already working when I was doing university, because I did university at nighttime and I was working during the day. And I felt that combination would give me an edge, hopefully. And it worked out, but hindsight's 2020 usually.
So were there any experiences both inside and outside the classroom that were impactful in directing your path where you are today?
I mean, college was really like affordability. Like I could afford college. I couldn't afford university. Like, I just raised my single mom. Don't really have some sort of nest egg. So I took what I could do and what I could afford and was like, seemed practical. And I think with university, it was about, learning things I didn't already know. So, balance sheets and things of that nature. Learning more about like marketing, maybe from an international perspective, because I took a couple of international classes. And I thought that part of just like being able to meet other people, because being at nighttime is usually more mature students. So people sort of a little bit older than those who might be going to university or college for the first time. So I think those things were really sort of impactful. And then also just finishing. I was talking this the other day, but there was a person in my college program for PR where I think this was their second or even their third program they were taking at the school, but the other 2 they didn't finish. And we were now in third year and last semester, and they were thinking about quitting. And we're all like, well, why wouldn't you just finish? Like, you've come so far, 5 or 6 semesters. Why wouldn't you just go all the way and finish it, even if you don't think you're ever going to use it? And so I think one thing people don't always realize is like college university is more about, can you start and finish something, than necessarily what piece of paper you got. Because I don't write press releases anymore, and no one really cares about that. Though having the ability to write things very succinctly is obviously very helpful in what we do.
Yeah, I love that perspective. Doing something and being able to finish, I think, is a big thing these days, because we live in that society where it's like things happen so quickly and like it's easy to move from one place to another. It's easy to just start something and move on. So I think it's a good lesson. Let's jump into mentorship. How would you define a mentor?
I think a mentor is kind of a couple things. I think it's someone who partly is rooting for you to succeed, because you want to have a sort of a healthy mentor, right? You could have negative or bad mentors. And I think also a mentor doesn't necessarily like tell you the answers. I think they more help sort of guide you along the way. I think if someone tells you the answers, that's maybe more of a coach, which there isn't anything wrong with having a coach. I mean, we see coaches in a lot of professional sports and other arenas. But I think a mentor is more like guiding you along the way, maybe asking really good questions so you think about things, maybe from perspectives you didn't think about before. Quasi maybe a slightly therapist there potentially, depending on what you're talking about. So I think that those are kind of the 2 qualities really that help sort of guide you and asking you the right questions and think about things you wouldn't necessarily think about. And then you probably don't like work for the person or report to the person, because usually the best mentors are sort of outside of your day job or company wherever you work.
I love I'm going to say adjective, although it's a noun, of therapist. I don't think we've heard that yet. But yes, there definitely is an aspect of, your mentor being your therapist. They just don't get paid as well.
No, they don't. They don't.
So let's talk about one of your early bosses, who I believe was one of your most influential mentors at your first advertising job.
I did a couple of years of PR after I graduated college, and then I moved into advertising. And this job was not easy to get, Danny. Let me tell you, it was probably the hardest job I ever had to get. I went through like 4 rounds of interviews. There was a psych test, and there was a phone interview. Now, I understand after I got the job that the part of the reason it was so hard was the last 2 people didn't survive the company. One took the job short term, because they eventually want to get a job with the government, which they left, I think, in less than 6 months, maybe even less than 4 months. And then the other person before that just didn't survive. So I think they really want to put people through the paces to see like who really wants the job. But I really wanted the job because freelancing wasn't going that great. I was early 20s, didn't know what I was doing. And I really want to get into advertising because like writing press releases is just not my bag or an interest. And so I got the job, and then Clint was my boss. And so the department that was just digital was just him. The rest of the agency, designers, account managers, all those sort of people were more on the traditional side of things. So they did, radio ad, TV ads, newspapers, all that sort of stuff we're used to in the 07, 08, 09 life, i.e. financial crisis. And then my boss, Clint, he was just the digital guy. The whole point was like hiring me or hiring someone to do more, the executional stuff. So he can go out and sell. Looking back on that, he was a good mentor, I think, in a lot of ways, even though he was my boss, because I think a lot of lessons he taught me was all about like doing things that's in the client's best interest. We should all be like working together as a team and not trying to compete. Because eventually, we grew the digital department from like 9% to 25% of our revenue, which meant we had to hire someone. And the person we hired maybe on paper was great, but nobody really liked the person in the company. Like, no one. We all thought the person was slightly weird for various reasons. They did things that maybe just culturally were not what you do in a workplace. And maybe that was just a cultural thing from their background potentially. But maybe this person would often sometimes butt heads. Like they didn't want to do, work X, so to speak, or task X, if you will. But task X is why he has a job or why I have a job. And so even though you don't want to do task X, if you're going to like open up a folder and look at it, and see that there's work for task X, then maybe you should just do task X versus leaving it open all day so then I can't edit it and do the task if I need to get it done. So we'd often butt heads. And I'm a very like no-nonsense person. My boss was like, okay, well, you two don't have to like each other or get along, but you do have to do what's in the client's best interest. And so if you're going to open the document, just do the task. Or if the client has a request that is like X, Y, and Z, then we just need to do X, Y, and Z, right? We need to like say what we're going to do and do what we say we did so that clients are happy. And then also, I think the client was also, we had a lot of like big clients and they always were very demanding. So I think Clint was very good about like, okay, read through emails 2 or 3 times and make sure like you understand what the request is and just be like diplomatic, so to speak. When you get back to the client, it's like, okay, we can't do this. Here's why. It's technically not possible. Here's alternatives. So I think he was a really good, boss and mentor in a ways of like guiding me how to be a better business person, and also try to get clients to like understand that some things we can't do because like it's just technically not possible. So it was an interesting job for 2 years. Eventually, the company went under because our parent company got bought by another parent company, and then we all merged together. And the people over in Europe decided that like we're a great company, but we're too small. We don't make enough money. So we're just going to shut it all down, which is unfortunate. But it was a great 2 years in a lot of ways because I learned a lot about like, managing a team and running a department and mentoring people myself, trying to get people to like do the things I need them to do so we can like get to where we want to go. And then even just work with other departments because every other department has different goals. Like, the account team just wants to sell, but they want to sell things that are going to be higher margin because they get paid a commission. But if they sell things that are higher margin, get paid a commission, well, that doesn't help us in the long run, which obviously didn't, because then the bottom falls out. We can't sell radio, we can't sell TV, we can't sell print, and digital can't make enough money quick enough to replace all that revenue we lost. And so it was an interesting job of just learning how to like work dynamically with different people who maybe have opposing goals than you, even though you both want the same thing, which is make a shit ton of money and have a job at the end of the day.
And during that job, would you say your PPC skills, your digital marketing skills, were you able to hone them in, or did you learn them on that? Or was it something that you developed on your own?
Yeah, I learned them on that job. Because before that, I did more comm stuff, PR stuff. Either my first or my second day on the job, Quint was like, here's a book. It was like one of those books you'd buy of like how to do PPC, but this is like 2007. So like,
Yeah.
there'd be a lot of books on the topic. So for the next few days, I basically read that book cover to cover. Because one of our clients was like, hey, I want to do this like AdWords thing back then, because obviously Google Ads was called AdWords back then. And it was a lot easier back then. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, there wasn't a lot of advertisers, especially in Canada. There wasn't a lot of competition. Google Ads looked way different. It was a lot easier. There wasn't many like features or options or settings. And so that job took me from everything of not knowing everything really when it comes to PPC, but knowing things about like at least banner ads and other stuff, to knowing everything that I needed to know in those 2 years, even things like, how to use Google Analytics, how to set up goals, conversion tracking. A year and we started running Facebook ads as well. So like how to set up Facebook and how to like run those. And Facebook ads obviously back then were very different. We also had a research and motion. If you're old enough to know what that is. If you're not old enough, it's commonly called just BlackBerry for those young people who are listening. So we had them as a client. We'd run ads across the Americas, South Africa, and Europe, and a lot in America, especially like Florida, Austin, Atlanta, places where they had hubs or offices. And so figuring out how to like do conversion tracking on an ATS or an application tracking system where jobs are was really important, because our client was like, well, okay, I want to spend $25,000 this month, which was a lot of money back then. I want to promote these jobs in like Brazil and Atlanta and in Florida. How are we going to track this success? And so a lot of it was figuring out, how does Google Analytics work and how do you track things and how do we make sure it works? Because not that I couldn't say no to, a BlackBerry or RIM. I easily could if something didn't work, but oftentimes the requests were doable. It just, no one has to figure out how to do it on the company. And I had to sit down and be like, okay, well, read these Google things or call up Google support back then when you could. So I learned a lot in those 2 years about like lead generation and conversion tracking and how to set up just conversion tracking. It was very much baptism by fire, because my boss, he's out of the office, he's talking to clients, he's trying to win more business, he's off with an account manager, and a lot of things are just, pull your boots up by your bootstraps, so to speak, and figure it all out. So it's the best of both worlds. But I think even today, a lot of people don't have that skill where they can just figure things out. Like Google, Meta, Microsoft, they all have really great support doc systems, but people rather just ask someone how to do something versus trying to go look it up and learn it themselves. And that missing skills, I think, is what really has people struggle, because if you can't figure out how to do something when it's basic, how are you going to figure out how to troubleshoot something when it gets complicated or complex?
So let's talk about how you mentor others. I believe there's 3 people who report to you now and that you mentor. So what's your style? How do you motivate them?
Each of the people are really different. So my style is going to be different for each person. We do sort of quarterly reviews. I've got one-on-one with each person each week. So part of my goal, outside of like learning about who they are as a work person, also learn about who they are personally and kind of what motivates them. Some people on our team might be motivated by money. Some people motivated by like more time off or a bigger raise at the end of the year or whatever. So part of my goal is to figure out like what motivates them, and then also kind of figure out like, what do you actually want to work on, right? I think part of why people stick at jobs is there's a bit of autonomy, but also ability to like either learn something or master something. There's that book like Drive talks about like autonomy and mastery as options. And so I try to figure out what people care about and then figure out, is there a way that a company can help support that thing they want to learn or do. Anytime I interview someone, I always tell them they will never 100% be happy in this job. I'm never 100% happy, and I own the company, so I don't see why you would 100% be happy. But I will do my best to figure out how the company helps support your goals or dreams, if they're work-related or not. Like if someone says, I want to work on, this wouldn't happen, but I want to work on like an airline. We probably never win an airline, but maybe we could win like a travel client or something like that. That's kind of closely related. So part of my mentor is figuring out like what problems they have, what do they want to learn, what do they want to do, and how can I like ask better questions to help guide them along the way. When I first started the company and had people, I often would just like tell people the answer, which in the short run is great because the job gets done the way I want, but I shouldn't have people do it the way I want them to do it, which is sometimes the way I would want to do it, like I would personally do it. People should do it the way they want to do it, as long as the outcome is what we want. So if the outcome is the same, then that's all I should care about. I shouldn't care about like the little steps along the way. So that's something I've, had to learn as a boss, I think, managing people. And then also just figuring out, what they care about, like I said, so I can like sort of nudge them along the way and get them to do the things they need to do.
You've practically always been in digital marketing since college. Obviously, you had your PR days. Most of your positions have focused on PPC. What drew you to PPC over the other realms of digital marketing?
It's more because I got it in the first job. This is like, we're in PPC and here's a book, to be honest. There was no opportunity to do like SEO in the first job. We did some like programmatic, maybe some display stuff like that. But PPC was just what I was given, and I liked it, and I thought I was good at it, and it made a lot of sense, and I enjoyed it. And it wasn't probably till years later that I really like started to read about, PPC, and read like, Moz has the SEO Bible on beginners, 101 on SEO. So that's really why I got into PPC. I look at like SEO these days and I'm like, even if there would have been an opportunity to learn SEO even 7 or 8 years ago, so half my career almost, maybe I would have learned it on the side as like a good thing to know, but I'd never master it. And these days, I understand the basics of SEO. I at least know enough to know when people are bullshitting a client, and I know enough to know when something like makes sense or doesn't make sense at a very basic level. But I wouldn't master it. So it wasn't so much a choice as much as like, here's the thing you need to learn for the job. I didn't know really the difference 100% back then between PPC and SEO necessarily. And so I just took the opportunity and ran with it.
So when you look back at now kind of where PPC has gone and SEO has gone, are you happy with how it turned out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two sides of the same coin. If the situation was reversed and I got an SEO back then and I did it for 17 years and we have the same conversation and I know a little bit about PPC, I'll probably say the same answer. But yeah, I mean, it's what I do. It's what I'm good at. I think because I don't do SEO generally or at all, really, I probably think it's more complex than it maybe actually is if I was practicing it for 17 years and being a practitioner. So yeah, I'm happy. I can't complain. I think there's lots of opportunity when it comes to PPC. There's lots of platforms. It's an ever-changing, evolving industry. Maybe it doesn't feel sometimes that it changes as much as like SEO potentially does, but it does change as much as maybe we just don't talk about it in the PPC world as much as maybe SEO people do talk about it, at least on like Twitter and LinkedIn.
So given your experience and expertise in paid search, are there any basics of PPC that you're always sure to utilize on new projects or for your own company?
Yeah, I mean, the big basics is, thinking about like, we do a lot of e-commerce. So we read a lot of like customer reviews. Why do people buy the product? What do they want a product? People often underestimate the value of really good ad copy, right? People see your ad, whether it's a shopping ad or a search ad or discovery ad. Or Google now has a new ad type called demand gen. Sounds made up, but it's a new ad type campaign. So I think people often underestimate really good ad copy. You could have the right shopping feed, you could have the right keywords, and the difference between success and failure could be just writing better ad copy, because maybe your ad copy is the issue, assuming that your shopping feed or your SKUs or the keywords weren't the issue. So I think that's something really good. I mean, something we were talking about with the teammate the other day, actually, is sometimes people like overcomplicate things. Sometimes the solution is actually very simple. The analogy I give is you pull a lawnmower outside of the garage, you're going to try to lawnmower the lawn, and it doesn't turn on. People would often try to say, "Oh, let's pull off the cover and see if the wires are disconnected," or they'd go really complex when like maybe the issue is if it's a battery operated lawnmower, maybe the batteries need to be charged, or there's no gas in the lawnmower, right? Sometimes the solution is actually very simple, and we try to like overcomplicate things, even though in some ways Google and Meta has gotten more complex because of automation. It's actually gotten really easy because they want you to simplify things to make it less complex than it used to be. Trying to simplify things, I think, is number 2. Ad copy is number 3. And then beyond that, like if something's not working, I always say they need to change something, right? If you see something that's like, it's day 1, it's day 2, it's day 3 of the week. So it's this week is Wednesday. If it's Wednesday and something didn't work on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, then maybe make a change of some sort. Don't like watch the thing that's not working continue on throughout the week. If a campaign's been running for, a month, 3 months, a year, and then all of a sudden it stops getting conversions on Sunday, it's now Wednesday, you need to make some sort of change. Watching something break and then not do anything, you might as well not even watch it break because you didn't take action. And so I think taking action is really important. People often will just look at something, see a problem, and then not do anything, when if you don't do anything, you're part of the problem. You need to take action and make a change, even if that change is something as simple as like, I'm going to lower the budget, or I'm going to change the ad copy, Those are two simple changes you can make in a campaign, depending on what the problem is, that could turn things around. But just watching and hoping that it's going to like turn itself around is probably not going to be the case. Because our general rule is if something happens over 1 to 2 days, that's an anomaly. A campaign could have a bad day. It could even have a bad 2 days. But if you're on day 3 or you're on day 4, well, that's a trend. And so you need to take action and do something come day 3 or day 4 so you can turn things around. Otherwise, the campaign is probably going to continue on the same path and not do anything. If it's a week, it's in a week 2, and you haven't done anything, ooh, that's not good. That is what probably pisses off clients more than anything is like they saw a problem and they just let it keep on going. It's like a train that's like barreling down and it's going to crash and you don't do anything. Like, why wouldn't you do anything? The train's going to crash. You need to do something.
I mean, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of so many different things, but like that example of the lawnmower, it kind of reminds me, I'm sure we both grew up this way, of like programming VCRs, right? Where people just had a hard time doing that. And maybe it was just like plugging it in or turning on the power button, but that kind of brought that in my mind. But yeah, it's interesting how people are scared, right? When a campaign is barreling down and they're like scared to touch it and they're like, ooh, it's going to get better, better. But I love that idea where I think that's a great rule and advice. 72 hours hasn't changed. You better make it, you've got to make a change or else it's just going to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, if a campaign's gone from good to bad, it's probably not going to turn itself around, right? Because what change? It could be people aren't buying the product you're selling or the service you're selling, right? It could be Google has entered you into like a bad auction. So maybe your ads being spent on display content or YouTube content, like something's fundamentally changed outside of the norm. And so you've got to figure out how to remove that sort of issue or that X factor or whatever so you can get things back on track. And yeah, I get it. It can be scary. And that's why we can have the 72-hour rule. Like I see clients have a bad day all the time. Even our clients that make $30, $50 million a year, they can have a bad day where numbers are really low or there are no sales potentially, or there's like one sale. It can happen. There's a bad day. There's even a bad 2 days. But at 3 days, I've learned where 3 days is that cutoff where I'm like, okay, well, it's been 3 days. I need to do something. I need to start digging into this campaign more. Start figuring out like what has actually changed, right? Is it ad performed worse? Have the keywords performed worse? Have the SKUs performed worse? Okay, those things aren't the issue. Okay, let's go look at where this campaign is showing up. Is it on like google.com, google.ca? Is it in YouTube? Is it display? Start going through your list of like where issues could be, figure out like what the problem is, where the issue is, and then figure out a solution to that if you can. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there and see that campaign just get worse and worse. And even though it's scary, you've got to take action. This job is all about taking action. And sometimes, even though it's scary, you've got to do it.
Let's talk about scary. You've managed PPC campaigns with budgets of all sizes, from a few hundred in ad spend per month up to, I imagine, $500,000 or maybe $1 million a month. What are some of the challenges you experienced working with the larger budgets, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I manage campaigns up to $1 million a month. The challenge is usually, all things being equal, you're probably doing things on a global scale. You're probably not just running ads in America, unless you sell a product that everyone in America wants to buy on a repeat basis. And you're probably maybe running ads on Google and, Meta or Facebook at that point. The biggest challenge as you have larger budgets, even though larger budgets are easier to manage, all things being equal versus a smaller budget because you have a longer runway, the biggest challenge is there's just more moving parts. And so you've got to like keep your eye on more things. It's kind of like someone on stage juggling plates or juggling balls, right? You've got more things in the air to make sure things are going well, from like conversion tracking to just like spend is going correctly. You set up the campaign correctly. We've all seen campaigns where somebody meant to set up a remarketing campaign, but they didn't add the audiences. Someone meant to set up a non-remarketing campaign, but they add audiences anyways. Just lots of like little basic mistakes it's easy to make when you've got dozens or maybe even 100 campaigns across 3 or 4 ad accounts, because you're marketing in North America, you're marketing in Europe, you're marketing in Australia, New Zealand, parts of Asia. So the larger your budget gets, the challenge could be, especially if you're in 6 or 7 figures, is just that you've got more things going on and you've got to have a better system and process or standard operating procedures of how to like check performance, make sure things are going well. A good example for a client that we've had for 3 years is early on in year one of the dev people made a change on the website, which is fine. Changes happen on websites all the time. There was a change where it worked out that the shopping campaign stopped delivering conversions, but all our search campaigns were fine. And so someone on our team didn't notice that even though they should have, because like some of the top campaigns were shopping campaigns. And so as you just spend more money, it's just really keeping an eye on like, what are my top campaigns? Are they delivering consistent sales? Is conversion tracking working? People often ask, what the difference is between, small and spend. And I think everything is just at a larger scale and you've got more moving parts. And for me personally, that's more fun because you can test more stuff. You can try out more things. You're more likely to have somebody at Google or Meta reach out to try some sort of beta or some sort of alpha. But if you want to step up and play with all the adults, so to speak, and not be, let's say, at the kids' table, if you think of like small budgets as a kids' table, even though it's not, because small budgets are hard work, you've got to be prepared to just work at a larger scale and have more things potentially break or go wrong.
So in your agency, with like these large accounts, as you're explaining it, it's a lot of work. How many accounts do, individuals manage, especially if they're managing like a large account?
It really depends. And so what we look at is not just, the size of that account or what it's being spent. We look at sort of like the work involved. Just because somebody spent $100,000, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be more work than someone spending $10,000 a month. In theory, it will be. But a client could have $10,000 and have 5 locations and just have a lot of like small changes that need to be done because they're dealing with like small locations. But when it comes to like just doing the work and how many people manage, so we look at like both the ad account and how much work it's going to be involved. We also look at things like client communication, email time, meeting time. And so we package all that up of like how much time do we think it's going to be involved in this client, from doing stuff in the ad account to things like strategy and research. And then we apply a number to that. And then we add up someone's numbers across all the clients. And we try to get them somewhere in the sort of, 8 to 15 number. Usually people are somewhere in the 12 to 15 range. And that usually means they might have anywhere from 4 clients to 6 clients. It usually averages up to 4 to 6, but we try to like figure out what it's going to take. Because I think the thing with smaller clients that people don't always realize is, outside of it being more work, is sometimes you need to come up with more ideas, right? Because you have a smaller ad spend and because you may have less data coming in, you may have to come up with a lot more ideas to figure out how to get the account to work. Building that account from scratch is really, really hard. And there's lots of people who would never do it, which is why you see agencies say, oh, we want to take on clients that already spend 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, because it's easier to manage an account that's already spending money and someone's already cracked it than it is to get an ad account that hasn't spent any money and get it from 0 to 10 or 0 to $20,000 a month. That is way more work than going from 20 to 30 or 20 to 50. We love small accounts that need to be cracked because it teaches you how to build an ad account, how to build systems so that you can scale up an ad account. And part of that is making sure we take on an ad account and a brand we think we can sell. But it's a really good skill set that a lot of people just don't have.
So along those lines, many of the success metrics you list for your past campaign work include both lowering of costs, but also increasing revenue. It can be difficult for some to manage working both of those, levers simultaneously. How do you approach a new campaign in that way?
Yeah, so we pick which is going to be important. So for lots of clients, it's usually like lowering their cost to acquire a customer is usually the first thing we work on, because part of the reason they're not hitting their, either their ACoS or the ROAS or something like that is because they're spending too much money acquiring a customer. So on September 9th will actually be 1 year since we took on a client. Obviously, this is probably going to come out after that date, so people are going to hear it and think, yeah, this happened before. So it's going to be a year with that client. But basically, it's a client sort of in the sports hobby area. And they were on a call with them. They're like, well, how you can help us make more money? And I'm like, I honestly don't know. But what I do know based on what you said is we need to both lower the cost to acquire a customer, but also increase your average order value. That way it's cheaper to acquire a customer, but you're having each customer spend more money so that your return on ad spend actually increases. Oftentimes agencies will probably work on one or the other, but it's few for agencies to try to work on both. And even though I can't guarantee that I can convince every customer that comes to the website to spend more money, the more customers we can convince to spend more money, though, is better off than not having tried to convince them to spend more money. And so when it comes to like cost versus revenue, we generally work on lowering the cost, so get rid of things that aren't converting, get rid of things that are wasting money. We'll often see ad accounts that have things like YouTube campaigns running or display campaigns running, where if you're a small advertiser spending a bit of money, or even if you're a large advertiser spending a bit of money, you're just getting started with Google, spending money on display or YouTube is often wasted money. So we cut all the fat, figure out what the true cost is to acquire customers based on what's working. And then we audit, obviously, as we audit the account, we try to figure out like, okay, how are we going to fix this account? Do we need to consolidate campaigns? Do we need to break out 2 campaigns? Do we do change some sort of setting or feature in the campaign. And then once we get things sort of stabilized where we have pretty consistent sales coming through, there's a pretty consistent, let's say, CPA to acquire the customer, then we can worry about scale and revenue at that point, right? Because the ad account is stabilized. Too many people try to scale an ad account too quickly. It's like, oh, I've got a week or two of data, things are consistent. How do I scale? And I'm like, a week or two of data is great, but you want to have a month, 2 months, 3 months of consistent sales that you can kind of predict what you're going to have sale wise. And then you want to try to scale things. You don't want to try to get a little bit of data and scale because you're impatient. Impatience is often a thing that breaks most ad accounts because people are trying to do things too quickly. And so that's how we tackle it. We sort of hammer away sort of at the CPA, and then we worry about scale. We don't try to actually do both at once, which is probably what most people try to do. But I'd rather spend a little bit of money or less money than what the client was spending, get things consistent, and then figure out how to scale versus trying to scale at the same time as trying to lower the CPA. You can't actually do both at the same time.
So it's obvious both in your career choice and the many successes listed in your experiences that you like metrics and data. Is there a particular metric as it relates to PPC that you think is particularly interesting or is perhaps often overlooked given the insight it can provide?
Yeah, I don't think people necessarily overlook things as much as maybe they don't spend enough time looking at the data itself. So the perfect example is you've got 5 campaigns in an ad account. People often just look at the data at a campaign level. They won't go to the ad group or the keyword or the SKU or the ad. And even though a campaign can look really great at a high level, when you start to go to the ad group or SKU or keyword or ad level, you can probably start to see opportunities to like cut the fat, so to speak, and get rid of things that are actually not working, which could improve your performance. A client says they want a 5 ROAS and you're at a 5 ROAS, and that's great. But if you can improve your performance, you could then spend more money. So I think it's sometimes just looking at the data from different angles as well. So if you've got a shopping campaign, whether it's standard shopping or performance max or PMax as people call it in the industry, looking at things by like size, age, gender, color, all the different ways you can slice and dice your SKU data to understand like what's selling, what's not selling, what's working, what's not working. So I don't think it's so much people don't look at the metrics or don't care about the metrics or there's only one metric to look at because people just don't look at enough data as a whole to understand like what's actually going on in the ad account. I often say when it comes to ad accounts is you want to know the ad account so well that you can kind of predict what sales are going to be when you come in on a Monday because you've gotten such consistent sales. And maybe one week it's 50 sales and one week it's 60 and one week it's 55. But you kind of know as an average how many sales you should get in theory so that if you come in on a Monday and there's only 30 sales over the weekend, well, then there's a problem because you should have had closer to 50 sales or closer to high 40 sales. So I think it's people just need to do a better job of like understand the pulse or rhythm of their ad account and look at the data more. And quite frankly, just giving a shit, quite frankly, to understand what's going on.
I assume a lot of people don't dive deeper and they just look from the top. But I love that example, or I guess that, sort of concept where it so well that you know what to expect. And because you do, when things are a little bit off, something's wrong and you can actually jump in and make a difference.
Yeah. I often tell people on the team, like, if I know it so well, maybe you don't always know what is off. But when you look at the account, something's off. And then your job is to figure out like, okay, are the top 5 or 10 campaigns performing great? Are the ad groups working? Are the SKUs working, right? You start to dig in and look at the basic stuff because often it's just the basic stuff that need to be reviewed and compare, this past week to the week before that or this month to that month, right? So it's kind of like spider sense, I call it. Something's wrong, but you don't always know what it is sometimes. And you just got to go through your process of figuring out, what's off.
I saw an interesting LinkedIn post. It was actually about GA4, Google Analytics 4. A lot of people, especially with all the changes and it's hectic, and people are getting lost. But I think the point of that author was like, you really have to know your business well. And if you know it well, then you can use a tool like GA4 to help you navigate. But if you're just relying on the tool, that can be difficult and you may not be able to use it properly. So I feel like those themes are quite similar.
Yeah, it's pretty important. I often say, tools are there to support you and help you do your job better. Tools aren't there to do the job for you. People often think if they just get a tool, they would be better at their job, but that's not really how a tool works.
So you've worked with many different brands and industries in your career. Do you have a favorite vertical or a business type that just seems to really work well with your approach?
Yeah, I think as an agency, when we started, we kind of just took on anyone because back then I wasn't trying to start an agency. I was just trying to like pay the bills and freelance. And then, towards the end of year 1 and into year 2, I niched down to sort of like e-commerce, direct to consumer, SaaS brands. So those are kind of the industries that I'm into. They're fun to work on. There's tons of business out there, which is always a good thing. There's so many different varieties and styles of e-commerce businesses, so it doesn't get boring. Even though each company is in e-commerce and they sell online, what they sell, how they sell, who they sell to are all really different. So it makes the work fun. So those are the things I like to work on. There are other things I enjoy working on, but either it doesn't pay very well, it would just be a headache. I like the idea of hopping a nonprofit now and then, but I know working on a Google Grant account would just be a pain in the ass. And so I don't want to do it.
Yeah, it's tough, man, with those limitations. And then people are expecting you to spend the $10,000. Doesn't always work.
It does not.
So you're clearly no stranger to hard work, including hard work that can be surrounding a hard topic, like your work for the NSPCC in London. How did you get connected with that organization, and how did you protect yourself from getting too personally involved with a very heart-wrenching topic?
Yeah, I mean, when I lived in London, I had the job through a recruiter, which was cool. I think I was their second choice. I think their first choice bowed out for some reason. Maybe they first choice got a different job somewhere else and they liked it. So they called me and said I was still interested. And I was. And I was doing some freelance work at that point. And, I came in interested with my job. My job is to figure out, like, how do I advertise our different services we offer to young people, talk with other people in the organization, understand sort of what we do and how it works. I think in general, I try not to bring my emotion, to the job as a whole. I think bringing your emotion to anything, even if you work in e-commerce, can be bad because your emotion kind of clouds your judgment. Kind of like during the pandemic, I even though the pandemic was really hard and I'd never wish the pandemic again, I try to really just focus on work because it's something I could control and try to leave my feelings and emotions about the pandemic for after work. And it wasn't the easiest thing to do, but I think that focus of having something to focus on was really helpful.
So, as we mentioned in the intro, you're a traveler. You started working abroad early on in your career. You've worked remotely at numerous points over the years. Then you wound up back in your home country when the pandemic and travel restrictions happened. And many people were forced to transition to the method of work you'd been doing for some time. So, how did the pandemic impact your travel plans? Were there any common missteps or successes you saw with your friends and coworkers as they started to work in a different setup than they were used to?
Yeah, I mean, the last trip I took was at the end of February of 2020. I actually went to see a client in New York. And I started to not think about taking that trip because you heard rumbles of something going on in the world in early February, but I took the trip nonetheless. And thankfully that was okay. Obviously just not traveling really. So once that I came back from New York at the end of February 2020, obviously didn't go anywhere else for 2020. And then the only trip in 2021 that I took is I moved from Montreal, which is in Canada, back home to Toronto in 2021, so a couple of years ago. And then other than that, I just didn't travel, which is something I love to do. Since I sent you my bio, I've hit a few more countries. So I'm at 48 countries right now. I just went to Greece a month ago, which is really good. I went to Portugal for 2 weeks as well. And so, yeah, I just didn't travel during the pandemic. It's just it wasn't safe. You couldn't really do it. And even when you could do it, the risk of getting COVID didn't seem worth it, even though I had all my vaccines and stuff like that. So other than doing that trip in 2021, I didn't really travel till the end of 2022. I went to New York, went to Chicago, went to Portland, which were all favorite cities in America for me, because I felt, okay, if I'm going to travel, at least travel somewhere where if there was a problem or issue, I could relatively easily get back home to Canada, but not have to necessarily take a flight, right? I could take a bus or a train or something like that if I needed to, if flights were delayed or whatever. So not being able to travel wasn't really that great, but I think it was a really good opportunity to work on the business and focus on that. And now that we can travel, I went to 5 or 6 countries in the summer. Spent over a month in Europe, and so now that I can travel, I just travel as much as I can. And I think the pandemic was good for a lot of people in a lot of different ways because I think it made people realize what do they value, what do they care about, and try to focus on those things, which I think is really important. Things I care about and value hasn't really changed. I love to travel. I just realized I can't travel because it's a health pandemic, but I'll be able to travel one day. When it does, I'll go travel. I've already decided I'm going to go for a month in Europe again, because spending a month in summer in Europe is really nice. And I'll probably go to Europe for a couple of weeks in winter to see if it's nicer than our Canadian winter, because I want to go somewhere that's warm. And even though I could go to Asia, obviously, and I could go to South America, I'm curious of what Europe is like in winter, especially Southern Europe. So, Portugal, Italy, Spain, Greece, and see if it's a warm enough place for me to work remotely that's still a decent time zone for North American clients.
That's awesome. And when you travel, do you ever travel with friends, or is it pretty much solo?
It's mostly solo, though when I can, I do travel with friends. I try to get various friends right now to do various trips. I think the challenge is being that I work for myself and being that I also work remotely, It's easier for me to get time off and travel. I don't need to go through like 2 rounds of approvals or fight with other people to get time off. And then most of my friends are also have partners. So it's figuring out like when are people free to travel. It's a lot harder to travel these days because there's just a lot more factors to take into account. But I've told each of my friends, I'd love to go with you somewhere in the next year or two. Here's the place you said you want to go. Here's the place we both said we want to go. So really the ball's in all my friends' courts to see, do they want to do it? Do they want to make it happen? Otherwise, I keep on traveling to see the world because I don't think one should put their travel plans on hold while they wait for other people to figure out when they can travel. You should just kind of do the things you want to do, and then friends will come along whenever they can.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. All right, Duane, so it's time for our lightning round. I'm going to say some categories, and you're going to let me know what comes to the top of your head. So number 1, favorite place to travel?
So Vietnam and Portugal would be my 2 favorite places to travel to. Both have a very good food scene. It's really easy to get around. I spent 3 weeks in Vietnam in 2014. I spent a couple weeks in Portugal this past year, and I've been to other countries for longer periods of time, but the food scene's really good. It's really easy to travel around. I just had a really good experience. And sometimes when you go to a country, you just feel kind of maybe not at home, but you feel super comfortable in the country. And both Vietnam and Portugal did that for me.
And because you feel comfortable in those places, do you like to go back to those types of countries?
Yeah, I mean, I'm already going to go to Portugal for probably a week in February. Definitely need to go back to Asia because I only went to Asia once and I spent about 3 months there. And so I smorgasborded around Asia. I spent 3 weeks in the Philippines as well. Didn't love the Philippines as much, but hopefully I'm going to go back probably in 2025 and do a big trip in Asia.
I know that you're someone who likes to cook or tries to cook. What's your favorite dish that you like to cook?
I've been trying the last couple of years to try to eat like a more Mediterranean diet. And so what I mean by that, for me, at least personally, is try to eat like less beef and pork and try to have more of everything else. So I love, fish and seafood and stuff like that. So I definitely would say cooking like salmon and fish in general is probably up there as the thing I like to cook. Other than that, it obviously just depends on like the season. If it's winter, I'm a big fan of like stews and soups because being single, it's good. I can put it like leftovers in the freezer and then take them out when I don't want to cook or there's like a snowstorm outside and I can't leave. And then beyond that, I'm technically not cooking anything, but just like putting together like some sort of salad is really easy. Even if it's just a fruit salad, I enjoy because it's a really easy thing to cook. Outside of doing things like ouzo is really easy to cook, so I often do that with like cheese and like spinach and other things.
Awesome. And then finally, I know you're a little bit of a reader and you like mystery books. So who's your favorite author?
Yeah, I mean, for the last 10 years, I didn't read as much as I used to. So the last couple of years, before I moved back to Toronto, I didn't read as much. So the last couple of years, I've been reading a lot of mystery books. So like Robert B. Parker is a really good author. So I've been reading a lot of his books more than anything else. And then also going through things like big publications who put out their best books of the year. And so going through those lists the last couple of years and see if there's anything that interests me. So I read a book the other day called Gone Girl, I think it was. It was about 700 pages, large size font text. It was an interesting mystery book. It didn't end the way I thought it would end, but it was a good read.
If I'm right, I think they made a movie adaptation of that.
Interesting. Okay. I didn't realize that. Yeah. It was on some sort of list I read of best books. I'm like, all right, I'm going to pick this up. And it was a pretty good read.
Yeah, it's with Ben Affleck. I haven't read the book, but the movie's pretty hectic. So I'm sure the book is even better.
Okay. I might have to check this out and see if I can find it somewhere online because I did like the book and I'm curious what it would be like as a movie.
In a film. Yeah. So cool. Duane, where can listeners learn more about you and your business?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can go to takesomerisk.com. So we got like a blog and we have like other resources material that we have. Other than that, I probably spend a lot of time on Reddit. I spend a bit of time on LinkedIn. I definitely don't spend as much time on Twitter or X as I used to just over the last couple of years. So yeah, I'd say like LinkedIn, Reddit, and then just following along what we're doing on our blog is kind of the best way to stay in touch.
Super. Well, thank you so much for all the nuggets today. You painted a lot of pictures for me, but also really, really great advice. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. We'll speak with you next time. Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.